The bottle warmer clicked off before I realized I'd been staring at it. It was nearly midnight, and the nursery glowed with a soft amber light from the cloud lamp I'd mounted above the crib myself. My hands moved in automatic rhythm, folding the last pair of tiny socks, smoothing out the blanket with its stitched moons and stars. I whispered his name once, just to hear how it sounded out loud. Caleb, I'm Emily, I'm 28. And this was supposed to be the moment in life where everything softened. Instead, everything inside me felt like it was calcifying one small loss at a time. Jake had been sleeping in the guest room for almost a month. He blamed the late pregnancy discomfort, said I deserved the space. But the door between us felt like more than convenience. It felt like a wall we'd both agreed not to name. He hadn't touched the hospital bag I packed for him. Mine sat by the door, zipped and ready with a checklist I'd written twice just in case. But his remained empty, no toiletries, no change of clothes, no effort. Earlier that evening he'd come home late again. No explanation, no apology. Just dropped his keys in the bowl and said, "Your mom called." I blinked. "My mom?" "Yeah. She said she hasn't heard from you." I opened my mouth, then closed it. I had talked to my mom 2 days ago, FaceTime even. He wasn't listening. Or worse, he was distracting. "Jake," I asked quietly, "did you remember to confirm the birth plan with the hospital?" He didn't answer right away. Just sat down on the couch scrolling. "I thought you were going to handle that," he said. "I gave them the info last month." My chest tightened. "You mean the form from the app?" "Yeah," he shrugged. "I listed your mom as the secondary in case mine can't come." The silence that followed felt like a deep, soft snowfall, soundless but smothering. "I asked you not to list anyone but me," I said gently. "It's supposed to be you and me." He didn't look up. "I just figured, Doreen's done this before. You'll be busy, it's better this way." Better for who I couldn't ask, not without sounding unreasonable, not without feeding the quiet suspicion curling its way into everything we hadn't said since the baby shower. When Doreen gave me stretch mark cream and a budgeting book, and Jake laughed too hard at the jokes about new moms overspending. I remember looking down at the slice of cake on my plate untouched. Something had shifted then. It just took me weeks to admit it. That night, long after Jake fell asleep in the other room, I sat alone in Caleb's nursery and reached for the folder on the side table, my printed birth plan, 3 copies. One for me, one for the hospital, one for him. But only mine had my name on it. The others were blank where the support person line should have been. Something about that felt prophetic. I'd created a little corner of safety in this house, plants trimmed just right, baby things in soft hues, a rocking chair that faced the window where the evening breeze made the curtains dance. But none of it could quiet the truth I was beginning to accept. Jake wasn't walking with me through this. He was watching from the shore. I thought back to a moment 3 months ago, early morning sun barely warming the windows, when I woke up from a dream about my son's first steps. I'd reached for Jake, whispering, "He's going to be beautiful, isn't he?" He'd mumbled something and turned away. Now that dream felt like a conversation I'd had alone. I pressed my hand to the side of my belly. Caleb stirred. "You're here. I'm still here." The comfort of that thought was what kept me steady. Not Jake, not Doreen, not the promise of a family we'd once planned out loud. I stood and walked into the hallway past the guest room door. A faint light flickered under the crack. He was still up. But I didn't knock. Instead, I opened the hall closet and tucked the birth folder into a canvas bag behind the towels, just in case. When I lay down that night, I pulled the blanket up to my chin and let the soft hum of the baby monitor lull me. I hadn't even given birth yet, but somewhere deep inside, I already knew I was going to be doing this alone. And still I wasn't afraid, not yet. But that night, one message changed everything. The message came at 3:42 a.m., just a hospital confirmation auto-generated. One line: final birth access preferences updated. Primary support Jake Ellis. Secondary Doreen Ellis. Contact confirmed. I read it 3 times. My name wasn't there. The ceiling fan spun slow above me, the shadows shifting across the walls in a slow, unbothered rhythm as if nothing had changed. But something in my chest curled in on itself. Tight, cold. I sat up carefully, one hand bracing my belly. My phone buzzed again. Let us know if you'd like to receive updates during labor, Emily. OB admin desk. Not when you're in labor. During. Because someone else had made themselves the point of contact. I got up, moved through the dark without turning on the lights. My steps were muscle memory. Past the framed wedding photo in the hall, us in Charleston barefoot on sand, laughing like we were untouchable. Now my reflection in the black screen of the microwave looked like someone I didn't recognize. Pale, quiet, awake when no one else was. I took a slow breath and tapped the hospital app. Logged in, navigated to the birth preferences. My hands didn't shake. Under support persons, I saw Jake listed, then Doreen. No space left, no Emily, not even a blank line for me to fill. Just a note at the bottom. Only approved parties will be notified of updates or emergencies. I whispered into the silence. You didn't forget me. This was intentional. Intentional. There's something about seeing it typed out. Not just felt, not guessed, not suspected, but documented, filed, signed off by someone else. It was like watching your name quietly dissolve off a mailbox you never knew was being sold. I pressed edit. The page was locked, changes disabled. Jake had said it. My throat felt raw. I opened the bedroom window, just an inch let in the early morning air. Outside, the pine trees creaked in a breeze that smelled like rain coming. And somewhere inside, something else was shifting too, not breaking, not yet, but becoming sharper. I wanted to wake him. I wanted to show him, ask why. But I already knew how that conversation would go. He'd say I was overthinking it, that I should trust him, that I was hormonal, that he was just trying to make sure everything was handled. And maybe I could have swallowed all of that. Maybe I had been swallowing too much for too long. But this... He didn't just remove me from a form. He removed me from my own birth. I looked down at my belly. Caleb moved soft and low, a foot maybe, or a tiny knee reminding me I wasn't invisible, not to him. I reached for my planner, the one I kept behind the rocking chair in the nursery. Inside it, the emergency contacts I'd written out myself. My mom, my cousin, my best friend from college, even though she lived hours away, just in case. I had people. I wasn't surrounded by them like Doreen was, but I wasn't empty either. Still, it was more than just the form. The erasure started earlier. I thought back to 2 weeks ago, how the receptionist at the OB's office called Jake when they couldn't reach me even though my number was listed first. I thought it was a fluke. They said it was a mistake in the system, but it happened again and again. Then last week when Doreen brought over freezer meals and said, "Don't worry about anything next week, sweetie. We'll make sure the birth goes smoothly. We, not you." As if my role was optional, disposable. Jake never corrected her. He just handed her the house key when she asked where the baby bottles were stored. That memory burned now. The silence between them wasn't benign, it was coordination, complicity. I'd been so focused on not being the difficult wife, I hadn't realized I was being quietly moved out of the frame. I opened my notes app and typed a single line. She wants control. He lets her take it. Neither of them asked me. I stared at it for a long time. Then I opened my email and began forwarding myself screenshots. The hospital message, the access page, the appointment logs, the calls they took instead of me. It wasn't revenge. It was preservation. I didn't know where this was heading, but I knew I had to keep my name somewhere, even if it was only in a folder marked proof. My stomach cramped slightly tight, then loose. A Braxton Hicks, but it sobered me. Time was moving whether I was ready or not. And if I waited too long, this baby might arrive into a world that already believed he didn't belong to me. I tucked the screenshots into a secure folder on my cloud drive. I added a password, the folder name Emily Stays. I turned off my phone, stood in the quiet. I didn't cry. Instead, I walked into the nursery and stared at the crib, the soft sheets, the elephant mobile, the drawer filled with onesies I folded alone. My name may not be on the hospital form, but it's on every single piece of this life. And tomorrow I'd find a way to make that known. Because the worst part wasn't that they didn't include me. It's that they assumed I wouldn't notice. The first contraction hit like a wave, low, deep, and sharper than I expected. I was in the kitchen pouring warm water over oatmeal, the kind that never stayed down lately. I paused, one hand on the counter, the other clutching my side. I breathed through it. 5 seconds, maybe 7, then it faded. I told myself it was false labor. I wasn't due for 2 more weeks. And nothing was packed for Caleb but a hospital bag and a prayer. Still, I sat down calm, not panicked, and opened the timer app, set it just in case. It was 6:12 a.m. The second one came 12 minutes later. Not a wave this time, more like something rolling over in my spine and then locking into place. I doubled over, pressing both hands to the table. When it passed, I whispered one word to the still kitchen. Okay. I picked up my phone and called Jake. It rang. Once, twice, 4 times. Voicemail. I didn't leave one. I tried again. Voicemail. Then I texted, "Hey, I think it's happening. Can you come home?" I waited. 3 minutes. Nothing. I called Doreen. She didn't pick up either. Her voicemail was cheerful. "You've reached Doreen Ellis. Leave a message unless it's a baby, then just call again." So I did. Twice. No answer. I stood at the window looking out at the street below, expecting headlights, movement, anything. But the morning was still. The nursery door was open. The crib looked impossibly small from here. That's when I understood I was going to have to get there myself. I put on the loose cotton dress I'd laid out weeks ago, grabbed the bag, slipped on the sandals I could barely bend over to buckle. Then I called the cab company and told them as calmly as I could that I needed a ride to St. Joseph's Labor and Delivery. The dispatcher said it would be 20 minutes. I said okay and sat by the door, breathing in slow counts of 4. At 7:01 a.m., the car pulled up. The driver was kind. He didn't say much, but when I winced halfway through the drive, he turned the music off and said softly, "You're okay. We're almost there." I nodded, unable to speak. By the time we reached the hospital entrance, I was timing the contractions at 7 minutes apart. They were real. No mistake now. I gave my name at the reception desk. The nurse's face went strangely blank. She scrolled through her screen and asked Emily Ellis. "Yes. Room 406. Your mother-in-law already signed you in." I blinked. What? "She got here 20 minutes ago. Said she was your emergency contact." My voice went small, but I didn't call her. She said she got a message from the doctor's office. I didn't ask which doctor. I didn't have to. They wheeled me upstairs while I clutched the handles, jaw tight, trying to stay composed. When the nurse opened the door to the room, Doreen was there, seated by the window, a coffee in hand, scrolling through her phone like she was waiting for brunch. She looked up. "Oh, there you are," she said with a smile. "I told them to go ahead and start your paperwork. I brought your insurance card just in case you forgot it." My insurance card. She had taken it from our home drawer. I'd wondered where it went. The nurse helped me onto the bed and began the intake. Doreen stood behind her like she belonged in the room. I turned to her. "Where's Jake?" "He had a meeting," she said breezily. "He'll come after." My eyes searched hers. She didn't flinch. The nurse asked who I wanted present during labor. I turned my head, whispered, "Just me." She glanced at Doreen. "Are you sure she's already listed on?" "I'm sure." They gave me the form. I crossed out Doreen's name with a shaking pen. Wrote Emily Ellis under support. Then added, "No one in the comment box." That was the first time all morning I felt something like control. They let me labor in silence after that. Hours blurred. I remember pain sharp and rising like my body was tearing open. I remember a scream that didn't sound like mine. I remember holding onto the edge of the bed, white-knuckled, praying through clenched teeth. And then Caleb's cry. Soft, raw, beautiful. A nurse laid him against my chest. I whispered, "Hi." "It's me." I'm your mom. He blinked once, then closed his eyes. Later I asked where Jake was. The nurse said he called an hour ago, said he was stuck in traffic. His mom told him she'd update him. I nodded slowly. I looked at my son. His tiny fingers curled against my chest, his breath shallow but steady. He didn't need both of them. He needed me. And I was here. But when they wheeled me to recovery, I passed Doreen in the hallway, phone in hand. She was showing someone a picture. He's perfect, she said. Just like Jake was. She didn't look at me, didn't acknowledge I was there. I didn't stop walking, didn't speak, just listened. Then hours later, alone, in the dim recovery room, I opened Facebook. My chest clenched. There it was, a post from Doreen, 3 generations of Ellis men. Welcome to the world, little Caleb. Grandma loves you already. A picture of her holding him, Jake beside her. I wasn't in the frame, but in the bottom corner I saw it, my hand. Limp, pale, still attached to the IV line. That's all I was to them. A limb in the background, not the mother, not the voice, just a vessel. I closed the app. My son stirred beside me. I whispered into the dark, "You'll know who I am, even if they don't show it," because something inside me had broken open wider than childbirth ever could. And next time, I wouldn't call anyone. I'd make the choices myself. The room was warm but empty, no balloons, no flowers, no family, just me, a hospital blanket, and the tiny heartbeat sleeping on my chest. Caleb had finally drifted off. Mouth-parted lashes curled against his cheeks like soft commas. I ran a fingertip along the curve of his arm, still flushed with newborn warmth. His skin smelled like new cotton, and something I couldn't name, something I knew I would remember for the rest of my life. This moment should have been sacred, untouched, just mine, but it wasn't, because outside my door there were people laughing, camera shutters clicking, voices whispering too loud not to be intentional. I shifted slightly, cradling Caleb tighter. The IV tugged at my wrist. I ignored it. My phone buzzed on the tray beside me. I reached for it with one hand, careful not to wake him. Doreen Ellis tagged you in a post. Jake Ellis posted a photo. 12 new comments. I stared at the screen. My breath caught. I tapped the first notification. The photo was from just hours ago. Doreen in the center, holding Caleb like a trophy. Jake beside her, arm around his mother, beaming like he'd just won something. In the corner of the image, barely visible, was my hand. Still, pale, disconnected. I was in the room, but not in the moment. I scrolled down. 3 generations of Ellis men, so proud of my son and grandson. Family first, I kept scrolling. Another photo, Jake kissing Caleb's forehead, Doreen grinning at the camera. I wasn't in any of them. Not once, not even a mention. It was as if I'd never existed. The sting wasn't loud. It was cold, immediate, like someone had opened a window and let winter crawl under my skin. They'd taken him from my arms for 10 minutes just to introduce him to family. The nurse had smiled and said it would help with bonding. No one asked me, and now I saw what they'd used those minutes for. Their version of history, their narrative. No mother, no labor, no blood, no pain, just their clean, curated joy. A flame lit somewhere in my chest, slow and steady. Not rage, not even grief, just clarity. I didn't speak, I didn't cry. Instead, I opened my own phone camera, angled it down, and took a single photo, Caleb in my arms, in skin to skin, a soft beam of morning light falling across his cheek from the half-shuttered window. No captions, no filters, just truth. Then I opened a new folder in my drive, named it Real. I uploaded the image and backed it up twice. Because someday when Caleb is old enough to wonder where I was, I want him to know I was here, even when they didn't show me, especially then. A few hours later, a nurse came in to check my stats. She smiled too bright. "Your husband and mother-in-law said they'd be back later with a few people. Is it okay if they come in around dinner?" I looked up from Caleb's face. No, she blinked. No, I'd like to limit visitors, just me and the baby. Oh, okay, I'll note that in the chart. Also, I added softly. I'd like to request that no one else takes him out of this room unless I'm present. Ever. Her smile faltered, then returned softer this time. Of course, that's your right. She wrote it down on the clipboard. I watched her do it, because now I understood if it's not written, it can be rewritten. That was their power. Paperwork, photos, posts, stories without me. But I had learned, quietly, and I would not be written out again. Later that night, Jake texted me. Everyone's asking when they can come back. You okay? I stared at the message, then typed slowly. I'm resting. Caleb's sleeping. We're okay. He responded a few minutes later. Mom brought you a wrap. She'll drop it off tomorrow. Another thing I didn't ask for. I didn't answer. Instead, I turned on the white noise machine beside the bassinet and watched the shadows climb the wall in slow silver blue patterns. I thought back to when Jake and I first painted the nursery together. He said he wanted it to feel calm, like a sky after rain. He picked the color. Doreen helped pick the furniture. I thought that meant we were building something together. Now I realized I'd been decorating a stage for someone else's story. But this room, this quiet, this child, they were mine. And no amount of photo ops or stage smiles could erase that. I held Caleb closer. I'm not leaving, I whispered. And I wouldn't. But I would change things, quietly, precisely. They could take their pictures. I was building the truth, frame by frame. The email came on a Wednesday afternoon while Caleb was napping in the sunlit bassinet beside me. At first, I almost didn't open it. Just another notification, probably junk. But something about the subject line stopped me. Transaction alert. Large withdrawal. Joint account. I tapped it open. $800,000 transferred. Marked investment assistance. Initiated by Jake Ellis. I blinked at the screen. Not a charge, a move. From our joint savings into a new account I didn't recognize. I sat still for a moment listening to Caleb breathe soft, steady, rhythmic. Then I opened the banking app. My face scan failed. I tried the passcode, twice. Access denied. The screen flashed a notice I hadn't seen before. This account is no longer linked to your profile. No warning, no request, no alert. I stared at the blank dashboard for a long moment. Then I reached for the envelope I'd started after the hospital, the one with my name on it in black ink. Inside were screenshots, printed messages, and appointment records. I opened it and added one more page. Financial access removed. September 13th, 10 to 17 p.m. Still no tears, just breathing, controlled, cold. Then for the first time in days, I picked up the landline, my backup for emergencies, and called the bank directly. Hi, I said gently. I need to confirm some recent changes to a joint account under my name. The woman on the line was kind, courteous, but when she pulled up the records, she paused. Looks like your name was removed as a primary last week, ma'am. Do you have documentation for that? No, I said softly. No one told me. She clicked a few times. There was a form submitted, electronically signed. From the other account holder, Jake. She lowered her voice. I shouldn't say this, but usually changes like this are done with both parties involved, especially for married couples. I understand, I whispered. Would you like us to flag it for review? No, not yet. Could you just send me a summary of all recent activity? I heard the printer behind her begin to hum. Yes, I'll send a PDF to your verified email. Thank you. We hung up. I walked into the nursery, closed the door behind me, and sat in the rocking chair. Outside, the sky was gray. The clouds hung low like a held breath. My hands rested on Caleb's blanket as he slept beside me. He moved money, without asking, without telling me, and whatever trust we still had, he'd just spent it. That night, Jake came home early for once. I was feeding Caleb on the couch, the lights low, a documentary murmuring on the TV. He kissed my forehead like everything was normal. Long day, he sighed, stretching. How's the little guy? I nodded. Good. He disappeared into the kitchen. I heard him pouring a drink. Then, I finally moved some of the savings over. Mom's guy found a better return option. He said it like he was talking about groceries, not our entire emergency fund. I kept my eyes on the screen. You moved it into a new account, I asked quietly. Yeah, safer that way. Less hands in the pot. Less my hands. He came back into the living room holding his glass, looking pleased with himself. You'll thank me later, he added, already scrolling on his phone. I had to take your name off temporarily so the paperwork could go through. I didn't respond. He didn't notice. He was smiling at something on his screen. My fingers rested on Caleb's back, his heart beat like a soft drum against my palm. They're building a world without me, and they think I won't notice. But I did. I always did. Later that night, while Jake snored in the guest room, I got out of bed and walked to the hallway closet. I reached behind the stack of towels and pulled out the canvas bag. The envelope inside was thicker now. I added the PDF from the bank, newly printed and time-stamped. Then for the first time I took a pen and labeled the folder Contingency. My name may not be on their documents anymore, but it was on this, and this folder, this was mine. I looked down at my hand, the one that signed the hospital form alone, the one that held Caleb through the night while Jake slept undisturbed, the one that folded every onesie, answered every feeding cry, and opened every bill. This hand hadn't shaken, not once. They'd built a paper trail to erase me, but I was building one to remember myself by. And the difference, mine told the truth. I stood in the hallway a moment longer, then closed the closet door slowly without a sound. Tomorrow I would ask more questions, but tonight I would hold on to my son, and the calm I knew they couldn't touch. Because I wasn't planning revenge, I was planning return, quiet, precise, permanent. And they wouldn't see it coming. The envelope was cream-colored, thick paper, no stamp. It came tucked under the door one morning, folded neatly, with Jake's handwriting on the corner. Emily, review if you want. If, not please, not urgent, just if. I opened it while Caleb was napping, the lull of the white noise machine humming in the background. I sat on the living room floor beside his bassinet legs, tucked beneath me, blanket across my lap. Inside a stack of documents, glossy pages, official letterhead. Ellis Family Educational Trust, beneficiary. Caleb Ellis. At first it looked like a generous gesture, a trust fund, college money, but something about it didn't sit right. Page 2, trustees, Jake Ellis and Doreen Ellis. Page 3, beneficiary Social Security number, Caleb J. Ellis. Page 4, custodial rights reserved to primary trustees until beneficiary reaches age 25. There was a blank space where my name should have been. No mention of me, no required consent, just signatures, theirs. They had filed the paperwork 2 days after I gave birth, while I was still healing, while I was still bleeding. I swallowed, looked at the edges of the paper. Jake had signed in blue ink. Doreen's signature was bold, confident. There was a single sticky note attached to the last page. It's for his future. Don't overthink this. Overthink. That word again. Always used when I dared to ask questions. I checked the fine print. The account had been opened using Caleb's Social Security number, the one I had filled out during a 3 a.m. feeding, bleary-eyed and alone. I had tucked it back into my medical file the next day, certain I hadn't shared it with anyone. Apparently someone had gone through my drawer, and I knew who it was. That afternoon I drove to the bank. Caleb strapped into the car seat sleeping. The woman at the desk greeted me kindly. Her name tag read Lena. How can I help you today? I placed the document on the counter, flattening it with one hand. I need to know if this trust is reversible. She scanned it. Her smile faded. This was filed as irrevocable unless all trustees agree to a change. And she hesitated, then looked up. You're not listed as a trustee. I nodded slowly. Even though I'm the mother, it's unconventional, she said gently, but legally valid. The signatures match what's on file. The SSN is confirmed, and the account's already funded. I stared at the floor. How much, I asked. She paused. $12,000. $12,000 taken from our joint savings. My savings. Moved without a conversation. Signed without a word. Tied to my baby without me. Lena printed a summary and slid it across the counter. Legally, you'd have to challenge it through family court to make changes. And if I don't, I asked quietly. She looked at me carefully. Then your access stays the way it is, which meant none. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table with Caleb in my arms. He was swaddled, fed warm, breathing in gentle sighs. The table was covered in papers now. Documents, screenshots, notes, timelines. The evidence I had been gathering in silence. Everything pointed to the same truth: I was being phased out. Not violently, not with slaps or threats, but with signatures, with paper. They were building something behind my back and pretending it was for me. But this was never about Caleb's future. This was about control. And I would not let them write him into a cage of loyalty, disguised as love. Jake came home late again. He leaned in the doorway, loosened his tie like he was tired of something. "Did you look at the trust?" he asked. I didn't answer right away. "Why is Doreen a trustee?" I asked. "She helped set it up, and I wasn't told." He shrugged. "It's legal. You're overreacting." I looked up at him. "Did you use the baby's social without my consent?" He blinked. "You left it in the file." "That's not an answer. I used it because someone needed to make things happen. You're always hesitating. This way he's protected." I held Caleb tighter. "And what about me?" Jake didn't answer. He just looked at the table, the papers, the documents, and said, "You're tired. You're taking everything too personally." Then he walked past me, opened the fridge, and pulled out a drink like the conversation had ended. It hadn't. Not for me. It had only begun. That night, I added another page to the envelope. Trust filed without consent. Confirmed. Signatures Jake Ellis and Doreen Ellis. Then I wrote the date, signed it myself, and underlined 3 words from the legal summary Lena gave me: irrevocable unless challenged. I stared at those words for a long time, then folded the document, sealed the envelope. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I placed the envelope back in its canvas bag, tucked into the nursery closet. Then I sat in the dark and watched Caleb sleep, listening to the quiet tick of the clock on the wall. Because time was moving, and I was learning. They were building their future, but I was building my case. The box had been sitting on the top shelf of the hallway closet since we moved in. I remember the day I packed it carefully, folding each item, labeling the lid in blue marker Dad. Letters, photos, church programs. I couldn't bring myself to go through it after the funeral. I told myself I'd know when the time was right. It turns out the time was 3:11 a.m. in a quiet nursery, with Caleb cradled against my chest and a storm whispering against the windows. He had finally fallen asleep after another night of fussing. I couldn't rest, not with everything unraveling around me in silence. So I got up, padded softly down the hall, and pulled the box down with both hands. Dust clung to the edges. I set it on the dining table, careful not to wake the baby. Inside were pieces of my old-world photos of my father in his workshop church bulletins, with his name listed for music, his handwriting on every envelope familiar and steady. I held one of the photos under the pendant light. He was smiling in it, head tilted slightly, the way he always looked at people he loved. Underneath it all, I found the letter, thick paper, folded twice, my name on the front in pen. "To Emily when you need it most." He had written it the year I moved in with Jake. I remember him giving me a gentle smile the day I packed my car. "You're building something new," he said. "But just in case, I left you a little compass. I never read it. I thought I wouldn't need to. But that night, I unfolded it with shaking hands and let his voice come back to me. I know I won't always be here to answer your questions. So I'm writing this to hold the space for you just in case the world ever tries to make you small. Love doesn't hide you. It doesn't replace your voice with someone else's. It doesn't rewrite your story without asking you what the truth is. If anyone tries to pull you into shadows you didn't choose, remember this. You are not a ghost in your own life. You are the light. And you are allowed to burn a little if that's what it takes to be seen. Love you more than I ever said out loud, Dad. By the time I finished reading, the first tear finally slid down my cheek. Not from grief, not from betrayal, but from something quieter, a remembering. I pressed the paper to my chest and closed my eyes. That letter held more clarity than anything Jake had said to me in weeks. More warmth than Doreen's forced concern. More honesty than every lie buried beneath the word help. They'd made me feel like I was asking for too much. But I wasn't asking for more. I was asking for mine. My place, my name, my say in my child's life. And my father had reminded me I didn't need permission to exist. The next morning, I made coffee while Caleb kicked in his little lounger on the floor, gurgling softly. I folded my father's letter and slid it into a clear plastic sleeve. Then I added it to the envelope, tucked just behind the trust document. I stood over the table and whispered, I see it now. I see me. That day I called my cousin Grace. She was a paralegal in Charlotte. We hadn't spoken in over a year, but she picked up on the second ring. Hey, she said, her voice warm and familiar. It's been a while. I took a breath. Grace, can I ask you something off the record? Of course, if someone opened a trust in a child's name without the mother's consent and she wasn't listed anywhere, but she has proof of misuse, removed access, withheld financials, then she has a case, Grace said without hesitation. Especially if there's a paper trail. I closed my eyes. Even if she's married to one of them, especially then. Later that night, I opened a new folder on my computer. I titled it Inheritance, Truth. I scanned my father's letter and saved it first. Then I uploaded the trust paperwork, the birth plan forms, the removed bank access. Piece by piece, I began laying the foundation. Not for vengeance, for reclamation. I wasn't burning it all down. I was reclaiming what had always been mine. And I'd start with the name my father gave me, because that was something no one else had touched. Yet, the knock on the door wasn't loud. It was the kind of knock meant to sound casual, nonchalant, like the person on the other side already felt entitled to be let in. I didn't move right away. Caleb was asleep in the bassinet, soft breath steady. The living room was quiet except for the slow tick of the wall clock. I stood in the kitchen, hands still damp from washing bottles. The knock came again. 3 taps. Then silence. I opened the door. Doreen stood there with the plastic grocery bag in one hand and a folder tucked under her arm. I brought more formula, she said brightly, stepping forward before I could say anything. And these, she lifted the folder, some papers we've been working on. Jake thought you might want to review them. She was already halfway into the living room when I found my voice. You shouldn't just walk in anymore, I said. Calm and even, she blinked. Excuse me, I'd like a call before visits, I replied, gesturing toward the sleeping baby. Especially unannounced. Doreen's smile faltered. Oh, honey, she said, soft and condescending. We're family, there's no need to get formal. She set the grocery bag down on the kitchen counter like she owned the space. The formula inside was the wrong kind again. The label was red, not blue. I didn't correct her. Instead, I picked up the folder and opened it. More forms, more control, custodial amendment suggestions, beneficiary updates, proposals for a shared guardianship clause in case of emergency. Doreen sipped from a travel mug she'd brought herself, unfazed by the silence. I know it's a lot, she said, but it's better to plan now while everything's still fresh. Fresh. Like my body wasn't still healing. Like I hadn't been left alone in a hospital room while they played family on Facebook. I glanced up at her. Why am I not listed on any of these documents? She gave a tight smile. Oh well, Jake and I just figured it's easier to process everything on our end for now. You've got your hands full. I let that hang in the air. You mean easier without me? She didn't flinch. You've been very emotional lately. We didn't want to overwhelm you. There it was, emotional. The word women hear when we're too clear, too present, too unwilling to disappear. I said nothing, just closed the folder and set it gently on the counter. Then I walked to Caleb's bassinet and adjusted his blanket. Doreen followed me with her eyes. I know this is hard for you, she said, almost pitying. But being a good mother isn't just about holding the baby, it's about letting others help. People who know what they're doing. I turned back to face her. You mean people like you? I mean people who love him enough to do what's best, she said firmly. Even if that means making decisions you can't. There was no rage in me, just a stillness, like standing waist deep in cold water and realizing you can float. I met her eyes. Let me be clear, I said quietly. You don't make decisions for my son. You don't use his name on documents. You don't remove my access to my own accounts. And you don't walk into my home like you live here. Her jaw tightened. I'm just trying to protect him. No, I said. You're trying to own him. She stepped back, blinking like she'd been slapped. I raised 2 boys, she hissed. I know what I'm doing. I nodded slowly. And I'm raising one, so you'll have to forgive me if I start setting the rules. We stood in silence. Then, without asking, she reached into the grocery bag and pulled out a small frame. A photo, her, Jake, Caleb, the one I'd seen on Facebook. She set it down on the entry table. I thought you might want to display this. I looked at it. The angle, the lighting, the way I wasn't in it at all. I picked it up, opened the hall closet, and placed it inside, face down on the top shelf. Doreen didn't say a word. She picked up her empty mug, adjusted the strap of her purse. I see, she said. So that's how it's going to be. I met her gaze again. Yes, that's exactly how it's going to be. She opened the door and paused before stepping out. Jake won't like this. I didn't respond. She left. I locked the door behind her. Then I changed the deadbolt. That evening, as twilight moved across the walls and the last of the light softened the room into shadow, I sat with Caleb in the rocker. His fingers curled around mine. I looked down at him. I won't let them make you a project, I whispered. You're not their legacy. You're my son. He gurgled softly, his edges of sleep closing in. Outside, the sky deepened into indigo. A single star blinked into view. I remembered what my father used to say when I was little. When someone tries to write your story without asking, take back the pen. I had the pen now, and I had the truth. They were building something paper thin, but I was building something unshakable, and it started with this. They were no longer welcome here. The locksmith arrived just after noon. He was polite, middle-aged, the kind of man who wore quiet respect in his posture. He didn't ask many questions, just offered me 2 options: change the cylinder or upgrade to a new deadbolt altogether. Deadbolt, I said. Both doors. He nodded. You got it. Caleb slept in his bassinet by the window, the light casting soft gold across his blanket. I stood nearby, arms crossed, watching every movement the locksmith made, as if I were guarding more than a house, like I was securing something I couldn't afford to lose again. And maybe I was. When the final lock clicked into place, the sound echoed deeper than I expected. Not loud, but final. The locksmith handed me the new keys. Anyone else need a copy? He asked casually. I held the keys in my palm and shook my head. No, just me. Jake called at 5:42 p.m. I let it ring. He texted a few minutes later. On my way. Did you need anything? I replied simply. No. At 6:19 he tried his key. The deadbolt stopped him. 3 seconds later the handle jiggled. Then silence. Then another text. What's going on? I opened the front door. Caleb was in my arms, already fed, bundled in soft gray cotton. I rested my hand on his back and looked at Jake through the screen door. Your key doesn't work anymore, I said. He stared at me like I'd spoken in another language. Why? Because I changed the locks. He laughed once short and incredulous. Are you serious? I didn't blink. You moved money without telling me, I said evenly. You filed legal documents about our son without me. Your mother made medical decisions at the hospital when I was unconscious. I am not safe in a home I can't access, so I fixed that. His face shifted, confusion giving way to something colder. You're blowing this out of proportion. No, I said. I'm correcting the proportion. You've spent weeks rewriting my role in this family. I'm not letting you finish the chapter. He looked past me into the house like he was still searching for the version of me that used to stay quiet. I'm still his father, and I'm still his mother, I said softly. The one who held him while you were in traffic. The one who fed him while your mother played photographer. The one whose name never made it onto the plan because you made sure of that. Jake stepped back from the door, blinking like the light had changed. You don't have the right to cut me out, he said. I tilted my head slightly. Isn't that what you've been doing to me? The question hung between us. He didn't answer. I didn't move. Then without a word, he turned and walked down the steps. I watched him leave. Then I closed the door. And this time I locked it deliberately. The deadbolt sliding into place like punctuation. Later that night, I sat at the kitchen table and opened my laptop. The envelope was beside me open. Inside, the hospital records, the trust forms, the bank removal, my father's letter. I added one more page. Document title: Emergency Petition for Temporary Custody and Financial Restraint, draft. Grace had sent it earlier that day. She added a note: You're almost there. Let me know when you are ready to file. I scrolled through it slowly, reading each section. It didn't feel like revenge. It felt like air returning to a room that had been closed for too long. I saved it under a new folder on my desktop. Caleb and me, legal. Because this wasn't about fighting them. It was about protecting us. I stood at the window as the night deepened. Outside, porch lights blinked on one by one across the street. Inside, the nursery lamp glowed like a lighthouse. I watched Caleb on the monitor, his tiny chest rising and falling, and I whispered the truth I hadn't said aloud until now. I don't need them to go away. I just need them to stay outside. Because this house, it was mine again. And the locks weren't the only thing that had changed. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Not just the temperature, the air itself felt heavy, clinical. Like everything human was being slowly filtered out until only facts remained. I sat at the left table, hands folded in my lap, a thin legal folder resting in front of me. Caleb was with Grace in the hallway, tucked into a stroller she'd brought for the day. Jake was across the aisle, looking every bit the husband who couldn't understand why things had gone so far. He wore the same navy suit from our engagement photos. That felt like its own quiet joke. Doreen sat behind him, one seat to the left. She wore a pearl brooch and a polite expression, as if we were gathered for a PTA meeting, not the first custody hearing of her grandson's life. The judge entered. Everyone stood. Then the hearing began. Jake's attorney spoke first. Your Honor, we're here today because the mother of the child has taken unilateral steps to remove our client, her husband, from the child's life, including changing the locks on the marital home and denying him physical access to his son. I kept my eyes forward. She's acting out of emotion, not reason, the attorney continued. What we seek is stability, shared custody, shared responsibility. The child deserves both parents without conflict, without interference. When my turn came, my lawyer rose. She didn't pace. She didn't raise her voice. She handed the judge a slim folder. Inside, everything. The hospital records. The birth plan omissions. The screenshots of Jake removing my name from our accounts. The trust fund documents signed without consent. The record of the bank call. The legal access logs. My father's letter included only as a character statement. The judge flipped through the pages slowly. She paused at the Social Security filing. This document, she said, shows the trust was created without the mother's knowledge. Yes, Your Honor, my lawyer replied. Using her child's identity, with no required input from the mother, It was filed while she was recovering from an unmedicated labor that her husband did not attend. Jake's attorney cleared his throat. Surely this can be attributed to miscommunication, not malice. The father was simply trying to secure the child's financial future. The judge looked directly at Jake. Why didn't you consult her? Jake hesitated. She was overwhelmed. I didn't want to burden her. I watched the judge's mouth flatten slightly. Then my lawyer stood again. If I may, Your Honor, my client would like to speak. The judge nodded. Briefly, I stood. My hands didn't shake. My husband and his mother made decisions about my medical care, my finances, and my son's future without asking me, I said. Voice soft but certain. They've told me I was emotional, too tired to think clearly, that I should trust them, that they were protecting Caleb from me. But what they were really doing was removing my voice. Quietly, systematically. They never raised their voices, but they erased mine from every document, every decision, every room. I paused. I've never shouted. I've never taken more than my share. I've only asked for what already belonged to me. And I'm here because I'm not asking anymore. I'm naming what's mine and protecting my son from anyone who tries to take that away. The room was silent when I sat down. No tears, no gasps, just stillness. Then the judge looked down at the file and spoke. This court finds that at minimum the father acted unilaterally in matters that required joint consent. Therefore, temporary sole custody is granted to the mother pending a full review. I closed my eyes for just a second. Let the words settle. Jake turned to me. She froze me out, he whispered to the judge. She won't even let me in the house. The judge didn't look at him. This court sees no evidence that the mother acted unlawfully, she said. She responded with legal precision, not hostility. Then she stood, and the hearing was over. Outside the courthouse, the sky was soft with low clouds. Grace stood near the bench, bouncing Caleb gently in her arms. He reached for me immediately, nestling into my neck. I kissed the top of his head. I didn't raise my voice, I whispered. Grace smiled. You didn't have to. That night, I returned home. Just me and Caleb. I fed him by the window, the quiet of the room wrapping around us like a wool blanket. My legal folder sat on the table, now stamped and signed. Official. I added it to the envelope, now full. This wasn't the end, but it was the turning point. They thought I would come undone. Instead, I came prepared. The condo wasn't large, but the windows stretched wide across the living room, framing the city skyline like a promise. I stood in front of the glass the first night we moved in, Caleb bundled against my chest in a sling. He blinked sleepily, one fist tucked under his chin. Outside, the lights shimmered in soft streaks, amber and white, distant but gentle. It was quiet here. No footsteps I didn't trust. No locked drawers, no voices calling me emotional when I asked too many questions. Just me, my son, and a room with no shadows hiding someone else's control. This was ours. We'd been in the condo for 4 days when I unpacked the last of the nursery boxes. It wasn't much, just a few books, the stuffed elephant from the old house, a photo of Caleb and me from that first morning in the hospital. One of the nurses had taken it without asking before they wheeled me to recovery. I hadn't noticed the photo until she texted it a week later. You look tired, she wrote, but proud. I framed it, set it gently on the dresser beside the nightlight. I looked tired, yes. My skin was gray, my eyes unfocused, but I was holding Caleb with both arms. No one else in the frame, no hands reaching in, no shadows behind us, just mother and son, the way it had always been beneath the noise. Jake hadn't responded to the custody ruling. No messages, no visits, not even an appeal. Grace called it passive retreat. I called it something else, abandonment, but I didn't grieve it, not like I thought I would, because sometimes what leaves you was never really with you to begin with. On the 5th morning, I sat on the balcony with my coffee while Caleb napped inside. The skyline was pale blue, the clouds brushed across it like slow-moving cotton. For the first time in months, I breathed without waiting for a knock, a comment, a correction. I opened my laptop, clicked into my design software, and pulled up the draft of my new business logo. Ellis Creative Studio. Then I deleted the last name, replaced it with my maiden name, Reed & Co. Design for honest spaces. I leaned back in my chair, watched the cursor blink for a moment, then hit save. Later that afternoon, I opened the drawer in my desk, pulled out the envelope, thick now, filed with decisions I hadn't wanted to make, but had made anyway. I took out my father's letter and read the last paragraph again. You are not a ghost in your own life. You are the light, and you are allowed to burn a little if that's what it takes to be seen. I placed the letter back inside, folded carefully, then added a new document behind it, my updated name registration. It wasn't a rebuke, it was a return. To who I had been before I was silenced by the shape of someone else's family, to who I had been before I mistook compromise for love, to who I still was underneath everything they tried to write over. That evening, I took Caleb out for a walk. He looked up at the trees, wide-eyed, his hands fluttering. A neighbor passed us, an older woman with silver hair and soft sandals. "Beautiful boy," she said. "Are you on your own?" I smiled, glancing down at Caleb's tiny hand gripping mine. "No," I said gently. "We're home." And we were, not just in a place, but in a truth that finally had room to breathe. The envelope was full now. So full it no longer closed easily. The edge curved upward like something unspoken still pressing to be heard. I wrapped a ribbon around it, not to keep it hidden, but to keep it intact. Then I placed it in the back of the desk drawer under Caleb's birth certificate and the folder marked Studio Launch. I didn't need it on the table anymore. It had served its purpose. I had been seen. Jake didn't show up to the next court date. No lawyers, no filings, no messages. Just an official email from the county clerk: petitioner's spouse has withdrawn formal request for shared custody. No further action required at this time. I stared at it for a long time. Grace called a few minutes later. He backed out. "Looks like it," she paused. "That's surprising." I looked out the window. The city below was quiet, the midday light casting soft lines across the floor. "No," I said, "it's not." Because the truth was, he was never fighting for us. He was fighting for control, for comfort, for the version of fatherhood that let him choose which parts he wanted and ignore the rest. When it became work, when it required presence, when it meant accountability, he disappeared. And so did she. Doreen never called again. No more porch drops, no more visits, no more framed photos. Just silence, but not the punishing kind. Not the kind used to discipline or correct. This was a different silence, a space, an opening, a quiet that let me exhale. Caleb turned over on his own for the first time that week. He grunted with the effort, tiny arms wiggling, then rolled fully onto his side, eyes wide with his own surprise. I laughed, not loudly, but with the kind of joy that sinks into your bones. "You did it," I whispered, "all by yourself." I kissed the top of his head. He wouldn't remember these days, but I would. The nights where I rocked him for hours, the afternoons where I worked with him curled against my chest. The moments that no one captured, no one posted, but they were real, and they were ours. I took him to the park that Saturday. The leaves had just begun to shift, hints of rust and amber edging the green. A wind stirred through the trees like a song without words. We sat on a bench near the path stroller parked beside me. An older couple walked by. The woman smiled. "Is he yours?" I nodded. First she asked, "Yes." She smiled at Caleb, then at me. "You look strong," I whispered, "thank you." It caught me off guard how much that mattered. Not beautiful, not brave, strong. It wasn't something I'd tried to be. It was something I'd become. That evening I made tea and lit a candle on the kitchen counter. Caleb was asleep, the monitor casting a soft blue glow. I looked at the wall where my father's letter now hung in a simple white frame. His words didn't ache anymore. They anchored me. "You are not a ghost in your own life." No, I wasn't. I had built a life I could walk through without shrinking. Not flashy, not loud, but mine. And those who had left, I didn't chase them, because the ones who leave quietly are not always cruel. Sometimes they're just used to doors opening for them. And when they finally find one that stays closed, they don't know how to knock. The courthouse was quieter this time. No judge, no gallery. Just me, Grace, and the clerk behind the glass window. She took my paperwork, checked the signatures, then looked up and asked one final question. "Are you sure you want to restore your maiden name?" I didn't hesitate. "Yes." She nodded, stamped the form, and slid it back across the counter. "It's official now, Ms. Reed." I smiled softly. That name. It hadn't been spoken aloud in months, and yet it felt like it had been waiting, not clinging, just holding space, like a room I had always meant to return to. Later that evening, I opened my new business site. The homepage loaded slowly, white background, bold serif letters. Reed and Keogh. Below it, designed for honest spaces, created by someone who rebuilt her own. I exhaled, clicked publish. The page went live. And somewhere in that stillness, I felt something settle into place, not loudly but deeply, like a foundation that no longer needed to be tested. Caleb was playing on the floor, rolling onto his stomach again, letting out that half-giggle, half-growl he'd been practicing all week. He looked up at me and clapped his hands. I knelt down beside him. "You're growing fast," I whispered. He pressed his cheek to the mat, then grinned. There were no framed family portraits here, no echo of someone else's name stitched into the fabric of our lives, just us and quiet, an air that belonged to us alone. Before bed, I recorded a short voice memo for a podcast I'd been thinking about launching, something simple, honest, for mothers who felt like they were disappearing inside someone else's version of love. I spoke softly with the monitor beside me, Caleb's breathing steady in the background. "My name is Emily Reed. I'm a mother, I'm a designer, and this year I almost lost my name inside someone else's story. Not because of one loud betrayal, but because of 100 quiet erasures." I paused, took a breath, but I learned that silence is not surrender, and leaving quietly isn't weakness. It's choosing your voice, your peace, your truth. Another pause. You can rebuild from anything, and no matter what they take, they can't steal you if you've already chosen yourself. I hit save. Then I sat still for a long moment, letting the quiet fill the room. Not hollow, not uncertain, whole. Before I went to sleep, I pulled the envelope from the drawer one last time. I opened it slowly, smoothing each page with care. Then I lit a small fire in the ceramic bowl I kept on the balcony. One by one, I fed the pages in. Not in anger, not in bitterness, just release. Bank statements, trust documents, screenshots, court filings. Each one turned to ash. Then at the end, I held the last page, my father's letter. I kissed the corner, then folded it gently and placed it back in the drawer. Some things you keep, not as proof, but as root. Caleb stirred just as the last ember flickered out. I picked him up, cradled him against me, and looked out at the city skyline, still glowing, still distant, but no longer untouchable. It looked different now, not like a future I had to earn, but like a horizon I had chosen. And that choice, that was mine, always.